Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where today we have Taimur Rashid, Chief Business Development Officer at a company called Redis, onto the show. And if you are unfamiliar with Redis, they are one of the world's most popular open source database. And as a real-time data platform in the cloud, it has become a critical component for many global enterprises to compete in this digital economy. And not only that, the company has gone from strength to strength in recent times. That's what put them on my radar when I read that their revenue growth of 54% over the last 3 years. And also, the company has a $2 billion valuation. But today, we're going to be discussing why it's time for senior teams to start seeing the creative value of developers within their organisations. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Seattle, where he's waiting to speak with us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks so much, Neil, and really excited to be here. So my name is Taimur Rashid. I'm the Chief Business Development Officer at Redis. And I've been in the industry for about 18 years. I started my career as a QA engineer in Austin. In fact, that's where I got my bachelor's in computer science from the University of Texas at Austin. And during my early years in the industry, I got a lot of experience on the technology side, doing quality assurance, software engineering. And that led me to moving to the Bay Area back in 2002, where I joined Siebel Systems, a leader in CRM. And through my time at Siebel Systems and Oracle, I spent about 6 years doing a variety of things from engineering, product management, and business development. And then around 2008, I made this bold move to move up to Seattle. And in 2008, Amazon Web Services had just started their business. And I joined as a fourth sales rep at Amazon Web Services, thinking that I'd only spend about 2 years there and I moved back to the Bay Area. But you fast forward, I spent about 10 years at Amazon Web Services. I led business development for them globally. And in 2018, when their business was about $25 billion run rate business, I left and I joined Microsoft. And for 3 years, I led the global customer success teams for Azure. And a great experience for me in truly getting operator experience at scale. And just the huge digital transformation effort that Microsoft went through in not only transforming their field towards more cloud-based selling, but also the cultural change, and being part of that was a really exciting time for me. And literally a year ago, in fact, today is my 1-year anniversary at Redis. I joined Redis to basically help the company get into emerging businesses. And so my role as their Chief Business Development Officer is to help them get into the machine learning and AI space. And so I spend much of my time on go-to-market strategy, partnerships, working very closely with our product teams and early adopters that are looking to use Redis for machine learning and AI use cases.
And I'm curious, if I was to take you back right to the very beginning of your origin story, even before your time in Austin, Texas, can you still remember where your passion for tech came from and what lit that spark in you to put you on this path that you're on now?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Prior to college, my exposure to technology was honestly through the vantage point of gaming, as it is for most young folks. And I was always fascinated with the experience of gaming. But I would say, though, for me, I think the curiosity really started with the first couple of classes that I took at UT Austin. And I will remember this defining moment where I was on the fence between should I be a biology major and go the pre-med route, or should I go the computer science route? And I was sitting with my professor, Gordon Novak, who taught artificial intelligence. And I told him very openly, I said, listen, I'm on the fence here. I'm not sure what to do. And he gave me this really interesting answer, which at the time when he gave it, I really didn't understand what he meant. But over the years, it really made sense to me. And so he said, hey, listen, if you're deciding between biology and computer science, remember one thing. In biology, they'll give you the mouse. In computer science, you get to create the mouse. And it's such a thought-provoking answer that he gave me. And really, when I look at what's happening within technology, and going back to Mark Andreessen's quote that software is eating the world, there is so many things you can do. You're almost unbounded by what you can do with software and technology. And so that for me was the tipping point.
Wow, what a powerful moment that must have been, and a great answer. It helped you go on the path that you wanted to take there. And that curiosity, of course, led you to Redis here in 2022. And for those people that are listening are unfamiliar with Redis, can you just tell the listeners a little bit more about them and the kind of problems that you solve with technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Redis is both a company and a technology. And so it was founded in 2011. In fact, the actual open source database was founded in 2009 by Salvatore Sanfilippo. And for Bengal and Yiftach Shulman, they started the company in 2011. And effectively, Redis is an open source in-memory data store, which over time has progressed and become a real-time database technology. And so there's both the open source component of the technology, which is available for anyone to download and use. And then there's the commercial offering that we've created called Redis Enterprise, which takes all the difficulty of managing Redis at scale, a lot of the operational excellence features that help companies really scale their technology broadly and in a globally distributed way. Redis Enterprise is the commercial offering that we have. And we are seeing great adoption. We have about 8,000 plus customers. We have a good number of the Fortune 100 companies that are using this today, startups, small, medium-sized businesses and enterprises.
And I'm curious, from your time in the industry, and especially because we're towards the beginning of a new year here, what are the biggest tech trends that you're seeing in the industry at the moment? Is there anything that really stands out?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Neil. I do think that if you look at it from the vantage point of where we are in our category of real-time data, I see a few interesting trends. Number one, there is this huge emphasis on real-time. Right.
Yeah.
And I think this is a function of more businesses are moving digital, right? Which means they're collecting large amounts of data. And the velocity at which that data is coming into the systems, they really have to respond very quickly, better user experience, number one. And number two, they really have to get insights from that data. So one trend I see is definitely this focus on real time. And what that effectively means is teams and companies have to really think about their underlying infrastructure. Is it readily available to support real-time use cases? Secondly, I see this convergence with connecting your classic data warehousing, analytics, and big data systems with AI and machine learning. Because the truth of the matter is a lot of that curated data that companies have been using for your classic analytics and reporting needs is ultimately that foundational layer that's going to feed into artificial intelligence use cases and machine learning. So that's another trend that I see. I'll talk about three more trends that I see that are related to data. And then one, which I think many of us are witnessing, particularly with what's going on in the news these days. So the other three that I see are serverless approaches. I think this whole serverless aspect is starting to take much more mainstream acceptance and adoption, which is with these added layers of abstraction that you can add on top of infrastructure, it's enabling companies to develop applications a lot faster. Without having to worry about the underlying infrastructure. So the serverless trend is, permeating across multiple categories. The fourth one that I see, obviously, is how that's leading into citizen developer platforms and tools, and really ensuring that semi-technical or non-technical people can get that same playing field to create applications, right? And then the fifth trend that I see is this emphasis around data governance, right? It is one of those things where it's sometimes an afterthought with how companies look at data, but given regulatory compliance, PII, and all these different mandates that are really anchored around how companies manage data, data governance is going to be very important. Right? So those are the five trends that I see, at least as they relate to the category of data. The other one, which is very interesting and so emerging, is Web3, right? And I think many are figuring out what is Web3 and how can they participate in this one. But I'm really encouraged by some of the fundamentals that are built around Web3. I think it's just going to be a journey to figure out how do companies that are offering technology today participate in that whole paradigm shift. And I'm really excited to see new companies that spawn from this whole paradigm shift as well.
And before you came on the podcast today, I was doing a little bit of research on you. And one of the things that stood out for me was your belief that it's time for senior teams to start seeing the creative value of their developers within their organizations. Is that something you can expand on?
Absolutely. I do think that with all this acceleration that's happened in the digital transformation space and the plethora of tools that are really empowering developers to actually take the lead, software developers can offer a whole lot of value to their businesses. And organizations have this mindset of really empowering developers and giving them an opportunity to experiment and innovate and getting very close to the business, at the same time getting closer to customers. And I always reference this, which is a great book by Jeff Lawson, the CEO of Twilio. He articulated this very nicely in a book that he wrote called Ask Your Developer, where he really emphasizes the fact that writing code is a creative endeavor. And the more companies can empower developers and bring them closer to the business, closer to customers, you can see this acceleration of innovation and ideas that get translated into things that help drive top-line growth and the overall business in general.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how Redis is also on a mission to enable the future of real-time AI? Because there's a lot of businesses talking about real-time at the moment, but this real-time AI seems particularly exciting right now.
Yeah, it is absolutely exciting, Neil. And I would say that Redis has a great foundation in how our technology is being used for what I like to call instant applications, or applications that truly accelerate the end user experience. At the same time, there's a lot of economic value in being able to have low latency applications, because in certain industries and certain use cases, milliseconds matter. If you think about fraud detection, you think about being able to recommend the right product at the right time. Milliseconds can make the difference between top line growth, between how you manage your operations, at the same time, how you manage risk with cybersecurity. Our efforts in real-time AI, I think one of the interesting things here is that you've had many companies really try to AI and machine learning working, and there's a plethora of solutions available. There's been this ethos of experimentation within most companies to really figure out how to streamline the productionization of machine learning models. But the challenge is really exacerbated because the underlying infrastructure and frameworks that support machine learning, they evolve faster than the mainstream architectures can actually incorporate them. And so there is this interesting dilemma. For us, what we've observed is we've seen companies, Airbnb, DoorDash, Netflix, Spotify, really take this engineering approach for how they've built AI and machine learning within their companies. And they've started sharing those architectures more openly as early as 2017, 2018. One of the interesting things that we saw was how the architectures had very central components. And one of the components is the feature store. And the feature store essentially is that centralized repository where machine learning teams actually manage their features, which feed into prediction systems. And for us, we saw that as a great opportunity, not only because these companies were using Redis as the online feature store, but at the same time, they were getting good results, better streamlined activity between teams, and then actual performance difference with predictions that they did. So for us, we have two primary themes when it comes to machine learning. One is to help companies modernize the underlying infrastructure, the data infrastructure in particular, so that they can support real time. And for that, our emphasis is around the feature store. Secondly, because Redis is a very versatile technology and has all these capabilities such as search, graph data sets, time series data sets, we want to accelerate the pace at which companies can build applications. And therefore, we see this opportunity, which we're investing in, which is Redis as a vector database, to power this very unique use case called vector similarity.
And do you have any use cases you could share that will just help bring that vision to life and help listeners, especially business leaders, understand how it all might work in their world as well?
This is one of the use cases that I'm very excited about. If you think of applications and experiences that you have today from, for example, Spotify and the music that you listen to, or visual search that you do maybe on Amazon.com or any other retail site. This is all powered by an approach called vector similarity search, which is basically saying, hey, if you listen to this song, what are other songs that are similar, right? Or in fact, if you're a certain profile listener, what other folks that have similar profiles to you, what do they listen to? And this whole problem is about understanding similarity of things, where you have to take either structured data and in most cases unstructured data such as images or audio files, and take that data and represent it into a mathematical representation, which then you can run these algorithms to do similarity search. Common everyday use cases like visual search, product recommendations, interactive Q&A systems. Underneath what's happening is vector similarity.
And another, well, you could say pressure on businesses at the moment is that innovating at enterprise pace. It's something that every business is battling with. But when they're doing this, how can they maintain stability while also adopting innovation? Because it feels like a bit of a tricky balance there.
It is a tricky balance. And I think certain enterprises have experimented with it and basically have cracked the code on it. And I think it's this interesting balance, like you said, of stability and innovation, where I think it's really about how do you create structured innovation that can allow companies to move fast. Yeah. And so enterprises do face fast-changing, hyper-competitive markets, and it requires them to organize in a way. And I generally like to look at it as there's some first principles associated with innovating at scale. And a lot of that has to do with certain things like how do you decentralize teams so that they have more autonomy? How do you structure them in a way where they can move fast, but at the same time, they can be consistent with how they move? I think an ethos of experimentation is very important, and being very data-driven to learn from those experiments to see what works, what doesn't work. And I think this is definitely a thing that businesses have to constantly think about. Getting to the point where they can balance stability and innovation and get that agility that they need is truly a learning process. And it's a journey more than it is an end state, because there's always these evolving things that happen within our industry.
Absolutely. And what about the journey that you're on at Redis there? Is there anything you can share about what you're going to be working on and your big focus this year and beyond?
Yeah, so my charter is to help us get into emerging businesses, and my focus primarily is AI and machine learning. And Neil, as I mentioned earlier, we have these two themes that this past year we've basically been learning and experimenting. And through the feedback that we got, through the signals that we got, we're very convicted now that data modernization and building intelligent applications are two very good growth vector themes for the company. And my emphasis is really to work with our ecosystem, partner where partnerships make sense, to help accelerate the mind share and the adoption. This as a core technology in the MLOps category, number one. And then number two, making sure that we can accelerate the pace of innovation for companies with some of the newer things that we're going to bring to market.
Wow, sounds like an incredibly exciting future for you guys. And we began the podcast talking about your origin story and that very powerful moment where you were given two choices there. But as we come full circle, I want to ask if there was a song, piece of music, movie or book that has inspired you or helped you in your career. Is there anything that springs to mind that would leave the listeners on an inspirational note?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many songs, there's so many books, so many quotes that I could reference, which actually fuel a lot of what I do every day. But the one I think that stands out the most and I enjoy, in fact, I was listening to this yesterday, is a song by Amos Lee. The song is called Keep It Loose, Keep It Tight. And it's a short song that really emphasizes so much. And he talks about how money, fame, and changing relationships can cause people to change, and hopefully for the better, but sometimes for the worse. And what's nice about that song, and the reason I listen to it, is people can often lose sight of who they are and the people around them. But it all comes down to we're all the same in the end. And the song helps emphasize keeping that balance.
Absolutely love that. I'll add that to our Spotify playlist. And before I let you go, for anyone listening wanting to find out more information about Redis or even continuing this conversation, contacting your team if they've got any questions, what's the best starting point?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. And so if you do a search for Taimur Rashid, you'll be able to find me. I'm very active there. That's one way to engage with me. Taimur.rashid@redis.com. That's my email. So for folks that want to reach out to me, feel free to email me.
Excellent. We'll have that link to the show notes so people can connect with you directly. And I love chatting with you today, especially about how Redis is enabling this future of real-time AI, which feels incredibly exciting, real start of a movement, and also for sharing your belief that we're in this golden age of AI and ML and how it's becoming this core part of businesses all over the world and for everyone listening all around the world too. And also for sharing your incredibly powerful story. And I love that decision there, the way you were faced with. Do you want to go somewhere where they will give you the math or go somewhere that you will create the math? It's something that will stay with me long after our podcast. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing it with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Neil, thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you, and look forward to staying in touch.
So much gold in today's episode there, such as why it's time for senior teams to start seeing the creative value of development within their organisations and how Redis is actually enabling the future of real-time AI. It was also great to talk through some of those challenges around innovating at enterprise pace and finding that balance to be able to maintain stability while adopting innovation. But if anything we talked about today struck a chord with you, please email me techblogwriter@outlook.com, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. Keep your questions, experiences, insights coming over to me here, and maybe we can fix a few problems or two together. And if you don't have a chance to email me, don't worry, I'll meet you here tomorrow, same time, same place. I'll be the one lurking in your podcast feed with another episode bright and early. But thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.